Good morning to you all. Good morning to our four panelists. And I will introduce them later to the viewers. And good morning to the viewers this morning. We as a Bible Society, we thank God that you could avail yourselves this morning to be part of this conversation. The reason for this webinar this morning is that we realize that the scourge of gender-based violence is difficult to eradicate. The brutal killings of women and children and even men are taking place on a daily basis. Society is challenged and sometimes become dumbstruck about why these things are happening. In a week's time, we will be advocating 16 days of activism against the abuse and the killing of women and children. Now, due to this came the request, how do we bring men into conversation concerning the scourge? And this morning we have four men here. They are fathers. And what I realized this morning that they are also every time on radio speaking out against the scourge of gender-based violence. And this morning, because of their expertise and because of them making their voices known to society, they will talk to us about their expertise and how they challenge this scourge of gender-based violence. And this is a conversation among men, speaking to men. And we realize this morning that we will find much inspiration this morning from their words and from their knowledge and from their expertise. And due to the fact that we as a Bible Society, that we proclaim the Bible, I will start this conversation with a word of prayer. Let us pray. Dear God, our creator of heaven and earth, we thank you for this moment that we as your creation could gather around this social platform to talk about a sensitive issue and to listen to you when you speak healing and transformation. Thank you for our four panelists who are fathers in the faith and made known their voices to speak against gender-based violence and to proclaim your love for humanity. We pray that you will guide them as they have prepared this sensitive topic. We thank you also for our viewers and listeners who could log in this morning to listen to them. We pray now your grace and guidance on every conversation and even the comments. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. To our viewers, our four panelists are Lester Madubela. Lester, I trust that I pronounced your surname correctly, but you can correct me later when you speak. Quentin Adams, much known to us as the shack builder here in the Western Cape. He's a psychologist. Jerome Samuels, who's a pastor and also a part of a worker at a member of Correctional Services, the Department of Correctional Services. And then also Dr. Braam, Hanekom, who is the founder of this Center of Public Witness. But later I will introduce them more fully to you as we would like to start this conversation this morning. And we also want to thank them for being here, knowing that we could listen to them from their expertise. And as we start now, we will introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Lester Madubela. He is a motivational speaker. He is a leader and also a preacher. He's a radio and TV presenter. Now, Lester facilitates conversations between fathers and sons concerning their upbringing and how their fathers groomed them to become the men they are today. Lester will talk us through an African perspective of what it means to be a man. And speaking from this perspective and also his expertise, he will guide us into his conversation of how these relationships exist between fathers and sons still today, how these sons value the example set by their fathers, and how these sons treat their wives. Now, from the perspective also as a preacher, you will then bring the Bible into perspective, and you will also tell us why he thinks the Bible can still be used to bring about change. Over to you, Lester.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Ruth, for that introduction, and thank you for the invite to this, great subject, which I think has become known as a pandemic to the country in terms of how the subject of gender-based violence is beginning to take shape, and how it's continuously in our lips on a daily basis. As introduced, the name is Lester, but I'll just get into it. Yesterday, I thought this was going to be yesterday. I made a mistake, but I did listen on TV. There was, this talk about, and this is some the language that is quite popular these days, the language of toxic masculinity and all of these things that are trying to frame the posture and sort of the shape of the current society, and the things that bother us as men, and so they are given names, as it were. And so when I was thinking about this, I kind of went to look back. I mean, speaking also from African perspective, to look back in how I grew up, and how most of us grew up as young men, as boys, as it were. A part of the misnomer, I think, is to kind of think that this has been, that men in general, particularly as Africans, that there has been this culture of oppressing women and treating women as inferior to men, and sort of, creating, therefore, an environment of superiority from the men's point of view. And I think that, for me, and with a number of guys I've spoken to, that is a myth. That's not how African men have viewed the role of women. For that, now that mistake has kind of been populated too much into the modern literature and how people speak around issues of gender-based violence. They'll talk about patriarchy and all of these things, which I believe that patriarchy, yes, is there, but it, in my belief, in terms of African perspective, it was never meant to create the environment that we now see, where basically all life is taken very cheaply, not just women's lives. Men take their own lives very cheaply, and it's easy to kind of, decide to do or perpetuate violence as and when people feel. So as an example, I grew up from, the man that I've come to know as my father was my stepfather, and a very wonderful man. He, in his own way, he created a home for me and my brother, Ubongane, who is not necessarily my brother, but he created a home for all of us. We were kind of a blended family, if you like. And one of the people that, I grew up with, I'd like to make an example of my older brother, who is now no more Umcebisi. We used to call him Braam. So Braam, he's been, when we were growing up, this man was sort of he was like a model of a man that you would look up to. He was quiet. He was neat in terms of his upbringing, going to school and all of these things that we would expect as young men. We were very much younger than he was. So we were looking up to him. I remember one time he was a marathon runner at high school. So he ran 5,000 meter marathon. And this was something that was good, but something happened. And when he got circumcised in the 80s, as soon as he got, I mean, I didn't know him as a drinker. He was sort of like what I was saying, kind of a good guy, if you like. But I mean, after he got circumcised and came back from being now a man and so on, he started drinking. And we saw a behavior that, I have never seen from him before. And that kind of behavior, very violent towards his girlfriends. And then, I remember he got married. I mean, he used to chase his wife around with a knife. And it was, I don't know what kind of a relationship that was, but it was a relationship nonetheless that happened amongst us. We saw that happening. And, but it's something that I can say for sure, he never saw it from his father, who was my stepfather at the time. So that kind of counsels that behavior comes from his immediate father. It was not, my stepfather took very good care of my mother. I never saw them fight. I never saw any of the violence that I saw him perpetuate towards his own wife. And so Braam changed. But, the one thing that I want to bring, the reason I'm painting that picture is that I want to take you guys through what I've put down as 5 steps that are kind of known as steps that have kind of been taught, when we're growing up. And you will find this in most, hardworking families. Hard work is one of the norms that I kind of grew up with, coming from my father's side. We were taught hard work. The man was working at the Department of Agriculture. He was serious about farming and all of those things. That's what he knew, and that's what he directed us to. He was unlearned. I mean, I think he only went to school as far as sub B. That's how he went to school. Only went as far as sub B, but he taught us hard work. And so that is why later on, I mean, we could be in the garden. You could, in the household where we grew up, is that you could go into the garden in the morning and wash dishes later, and there was no discrimination around that this particular job is for women and this particular job is for men. That's the first part that I want to talk to or submit. The other one, and I think that as I submit that is true for most families, even in my house today, that's the same kind of, ethos that prevails. My son, he's the oldest, but he does basically everything. He can be in the garden, can wash a car, but he can cook in the afternoon. That's what we have created. Men as providers, that's another thing that we grew up knowing, that a man has to provide. Now that one is a double-edged sword in a way that it's putting men under pressure in the current sort of society where people feel like if they are not providing, therefore they are less of a man. And then therefore decide to, camouflage that by doing all sorts of violence against women. We've seen that. And that culture, I don't want to say it's a culture, but that behavior we continue to see happening. And that's what perpetuates most of the gender-based violence, as it were. So whilst men are being promoted and seen as providers, but that also has a negative side to it, that when a man cannot provide, then they see themselves as failures and find other ways of compensating for that. The other one, which I've spoken about earlier on as well, is circumcision as a sign of growth and taking of responsibility. Circumcision is part of the culture of Africans, particularly us as Xhosa people, that when you get into a circumcision phase, we believe that your manhood then begins. That's why if you see and go through that process, you'll find that you go to the mothers who will talk to you now and say, now that you're a man, these are the expectations that we have now from you. You are no longer a boy. And then you move, then you go to Otata, the elders, and they will also, share their own views and experiences and how those expectations now need to be met as to the stage that you're moving into. So that's another part which as Xhosa people or as Africans we get into. The other one is, you know, the what I call separate but inclusive growth as well. So the environment on the women's side, we have what is, we believe that this is kind of, it's got a Western feel to it, where ladies, they go on the 21st birthday and then they get given a key, but that's for a Western influence. But the African influence or the understanding of that would have been what mostly the Zulus are doing in Donjana, where you get tested whether you're still a virgin and all of that. But that Xhosas used to do that as well. But the thing is that nowhere in this separate but inclusive development is one said to be superior over the other. And I think that's one of the things that's very important as we move forward in this debate, that from the roots and where it comes from, everything else, it looks from my side, of course, aside from some of the separate, and I'm not saying that this is general, this is a generic sort of submission I'm putting. Some people are doing some things differently, but in most of the societies and environment that we've grown up, that's why sometimes you find that most people our age, we are nostalgic when we talk about where we come from and how we grew up, because there was a certain element of respect, certain element of knowing what to do and what not to do. You know, unlike these days where everything, you know, is kind of put to the test or challenged, as it were. And then the last one, I would say, evolution of modernity has become one of the major problems that I think, you know, we are faced with. Why I say this, the evolution is, I was making an example on Saturday. I went to a funeral. We were talking about how it was in the olden days that I could not, even if I was a young boy smoking, I couldn't smoke in front of my elders. Look at today, teachers. One of the reasons you have problems between teachers and students is because these people, they converge together in our days at taverns, which was something that you'd never see in the olden days. A teacher has the respect of the village, not only of the students, but the village or the community in which they presided. So even today, my teachers that, you know, taught me when I was a young man, when I see them, you know, the greeting and sort of the arrangement, the communication is still that of respect. And it doesn't matter which stage or where they are in life, you know, some of them, they could be down and out and doing, but that relationship still is the same. But in the modernization and sort of the environment in which we live, teachers and students can communicate on WhatsApp. We don't know what's happening on Facebook. They become friends, and then that relationship gets into other areas that it shouldn't be getting into. So my submission, I guess, you know, Dr. Ruth and everyone who's listening here, is that there is nowhere where we can trace this as a justification, even if we go back, you know, under the most difficult of times, under the apartheid era, where there was one cause where we were fighting apartheid. But even with that one cause that was in existence at the time, the fundamentals and the core relationships between fathers and sons remained cordial, and they remained that of respect, even with mothers and all. I mean, most of my friends were raised by their mothers because their fathers were not there, and they now have families. I mean, I remember speaking to one friend of mine. He was having, I think it was the 17th year anniversary with his wife. And I'm thinking, this guy had no blueprint, you know, because he comes from a broken family. He had no blueprint of what a marriage should be, but yet this man is still married. He's raising wonderful teenagers there. And I think that, therefore, for me, the idea that there's that historical connection, and of course, I mean, there's a psychologist here, maybe who might disagree with me on this particular submission, but I do believe that some of these things they come with what I would call, now speaking from the position of being a preacher as I close my submission, that there seems to be, we are living in a time where human rights and sort of all the things that we deem fit for ourselves far outweigh what we actually should be the fundamentals of how we live. And part of that is premised from the Bible. The fact that today you can have someone who says, look, I feel like I'm a woman, and being a man as I am, and therefore that person can then say, look, I have a right to be called a woman and play, and this is coming, by the way, into our own shows, I believe, that you have that type of things happening in America, where a man who probably has failed playing in the men's sports, now they go and say, because they feel like a woman, they go and play in that particular field. So I think that type of culture and modernity and the evolution that we have, our own principles and values have always been meant for the real people that we were. Culture did not take into account that there would be a movement or change that we feel now today. Culture and the fundamentals and the values that we grew up on didn't take into account the issues of non-employment, which are the things that sometimes are being put out there to say that men or people are being violent because they are not employed and so on. So those things should not be used as an excuse to actually find men killing their women. The Gauteng thing, I mean, that happened quite recently, where men, was found to have a women's parts in the fridge. Those things should never happen. It should never really happen. And if we had stuck to the basic fundamentals of who we are as human beings, the moral fiber that has been, sort of eroded in the people that we are today, those are, I think, the results of what we are seeing today are not the results of old. They are results of an erosion of some of the fundamentals. Hard work, men being hard workers, men being providers, men taking responsibility of the very fundamentals of why men should be taking those responsibilities. That is being a protector of your family, leading your boy or your girl child in the right direction. Those have been eroded, and that's why we are faced with what we are faced with. That is my submission for now, Dr. Ruth.
Lester, thank you this morning for taking us actually through this African perspective of understanding and your expertise of what it means to be a man in the African culture, and how you could clear certain myths that people believe, and also with the change in society that has taken place due to modernity, that you could also give us the after effects, that when the situation changed, that how an African man or a boy could be affected by change, because, as you said, that culture did not cater for that. We didn't know that these things will happen, but there was this foundation that was laid by the fathers. This is how a man should behave. Also, for telling us this morning that there was no distinction between girls and boys, and that everybody could share a common ground in the African culture. Thank you, Lester. We appreciate your input this morning and how you journeyed with us through this topic that you have prepared. To our viewers this morning, or audience, there is a chat. You can write your comments or your questions to Lester in the chat, or the space where the chat is, so that we can pick it up later at the end of these conversations, what the comments are and what would be your question to Lester. So once again, Lester, thank you as you continue listening to us here this morning, as the rest of the team will be engaging in this conversation. Our next panelist this morning is Quinton Adams. Quinton is a psychologist and also known, as I've said earlier, as the shack builder in the Western Cape. In his presentation, Quinton will tell us his journey and conversations with young men or boys and how they can change. He will give us, or he will speak from a psychological perspective, and also what is the mindset of these young men when they can own their own house and when they are open to change. So Quinton, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruth. Thank you very much, Lester, for a very good presentation, providing us the African's perspective regarding manhood and the challenges that we are facing. And thanks for sharing your stories. To my other fellow panelists, thank you very much for joining with you. I'm looking forward to listen to Jerome and Dr. Braam. I know they are also people very experienced and have a lot of knowledge and insight regarding this topic and also other related issues in society. Let me start off by saying three things, so making three statements. First of all, I've been asked to look at a cognitive approach towards manhood, and I will provide two of my favorite theories, psychological theories, to explain how young people, young men perceive, understand, construct, develop manhood. And then secondly, I will also look at the challenges that we are facing and how to rectify the situation. So yeah, thank you very much. If it sounds too psychological, it's fine. I just love this explanation. And then lastly, I started off as a psychologist, and I was very interested in the phenomenon of violence. And later on, I was responsible to look at the entire violence spectrum, from low-level aggression, which entails swearing in the classroom. I developed a swearing project. I did some research on swearing on the Cape Flats in Cape Town. I went to different schools and I asked them, which words do you hear or did you hear when people swear at you? And there's just one word that came out. And then I moved also to bully behavior, which I still thought was a mild, violent experience, to the more serious ones. So I covered from mild, low-level aggression to extreme aggression, of which the end result is why boys murder other boys. So I work very closely with a world-renowned psychologist, still one of my best psychologists in the field of violence and boys. His name is James Gabarino, and he has written a book, Why Boys Killed Other Boys. And James came over to South Africa to look at the work that I was doing at that time regarding violence, and especially with the murder cases. As you can recall, in 2012, 2013, there was another big gang war on the Cape Flats, and I was doing interventions with the Department of Community Safety with former Minister Dan Plato. And I was tasked to look at a research report, a gang research report. So I drafted the Western Cape strategy on gang violence for the Western Cape. So that is my background. And then I also looked at the Anine Boysen case, where Anine Boysen was brutally murdered. I wasn't involved in the court case. I was involved in the circumstances of the community. So I went there and I spent about 6 months there. And then I written a report to Cabinet, the Western Cape government, to Cabinet, explaining to them the problem with violence. And I'm still confused, not confused, but I don't like the word gender-based violence. I prefer interpersonal violence. Because interpersonal violence is, some say, is a narrow definition. I think it gives us more detail and insight regarding the type of violence. And some people call it intimate interpersonal violence. So I was doing a lot of research with James Gabrino on intimate or interpersonal violence, and people refer to gender-based violence later on. And then I said in 2013 that we have to do some serious interventions with young men. And one of the findings that I've made in that research was that it's very dangerous for a young woman if she terminates the relationship with a man or a young man that has psychological challenges and are psychologically vulnerable. And I must say, I concur with the theory. It's more or less the same theory of Professor James Gabrino. And we can remember the Oscar Pistorius case in the same year, 2013, and then 12 women were murdered in that same year. And I went to most of the cases. And since then, it just started to escalate. And I still believe, and that's why I want to commend you, Dr. Ruth, and the Bible Society for this discussion, because most of the focus in our intervention, even the 16 days of activism, you will just see most of the time women on the stage as if the women are the problems. They are not the problems, they are the victims. And we forget to look at the perpetrators. I know Dr. Jerome Samuels, they are working with correctional services, but I think it is too late when they get into the criminal justice system. What we need to do is we need to do more preventative work, not only with the kids who are in trouble or who already are part of the high risk group. We need to start at a much earlier phase. And the phase that I think that we have to start is the Sunday schools. That's the basis where we need to start. And there's a particular reason why I'm talking about the Sunday schools, because we have found, and we can talk to Dr. Samuels also regarding this issue, is that whenever I received a case, I was doing a lot of work with high-risk youth, the youth in prisons, youth in conflict with the law, and guys that became gangsters, young gangsters, street gangs, the number gangs, etc., etc. But what was very interesting, and I have to highlight this because I think we neglect the role of the Sunday school, and the reason why the Sunday school is so important is that whenever we sit with this person, we ask him or her, or most of them were young men, did you attend a church, a synagogue, or a mosque? And the moment when we hear that they have attended, then we know that there's a basis, there's a spiritual basis. But if they didn't attend any church in the Sunday school, whether it's the confirmation classes, then we know they don't have a basis. And we talk about child onset and youth onset conduct disorder and violent personality disorder. So it's important that most of these young people, if they are not exposed to the church or exposed to spirituality at an early age, those value system will be replaced or some other system will determine and provide them a framework of understanding how the world will operate. Now, as Lester has said, and he used this word toxic environment. Most of these kids, they're living in a toxic environment on different levels. On the micro system, on the meso system, on the macro system. Who is providing us with a value system? Most of the time, people are talking about subcultures. Subcultures are not only the criminal guys, but there are other subcultures and there are dominant cultures. And our biggest fight at this point in time is the media is determining the value system. When you ask the kids, what are they watching? They're watching television, they're watching YouTube, they're watching videos, they're watching games. And please just make a note regarding this explosion in the gaming industry. They look at the strategy games. They look at how to fight. It's a big industry, and the young people are hooked to this, which means that the media are determining the value system. Now, if I want to come back to my second part, and that is how they develop manhood. Now, manhood is a social construction. So I want to just briefly focus on two theories, which helped me a lot in understanding why boys became killers and why they became violent, why they became predators. The one theory is a theory from Piaget. He's a cognitive science psychologist, and he made two very profound statements. He said that children construct a series of schemata. Now, what is important is the word schemata. And I want to spend a few seconds on the word schemata. Schemata is a pattern or thought that organizes current knowledge and current experiences that will provide a framework for future understanding. So what happens is that their interactions with the environment, the immediate environment, and they will develop a thought pattern with the current experiences, and that will provide a framework for them for future understanding. The second thing about schemata is a mental structure of preconceived ideas or experiences. And then the third point is it becomes a framework representing some aspect of the world, representing some aspect of the world. And then what is very interesting, the moment when they've developed the schemata, then it becomes fairly unchanged. So schemata is a mental framework. Now, what is important about schemata is because of their upbringing, they look at what we call manhood figures. And the early experiences of these manhood figures will help them to develop a schemata about manhood. Now, I will come back to schemata. There's another theory that is very, very interesting. We call it object relations theory, and it is from the psychoanalytic framework, which basically says that you develop a psyche in relation to others, which means you develop a mind or a mindset in relation to others. And then the second thing is that when you have this object relation or this object, you start to internalize that image. Now, that is for me powerful. First of all, you develop a schemata, you develop a psyche, a mindset, an understanding or in relation to others. And then the objects are internalized, and you have at a very young age an understanding of the view, or you have an understanding of objects, or you have an understanding of people. Now, what happens that there are what I call inaccurate schematas, overestimated schematas, or schematas based on irrational belief systems. Now, there are seven schematas of manhood. The first one is, or let me just make a basis, people equate manhood with fatherhood. So your first experience of manhood is through fatherhood. Now there are 7, there could be more schematas of fatherhood. The first one is the active and caring father. That is the first schemata. The second one is the provider. He doesn't care, he's not active involved, but he's the provider. The third one is the strict person, fatherhood. And then it becomes complicated because you have this father in the house, but he's the absent but present father. He's there, he doesn't speak to you, you feel alone, you can't relate to him. And then there's the other one, and I don't want to go into stats now at this point in time. Then you get the missing manhood schemata. You were born, you never heard about him, they never told you about him, he's just missing in action. So there's no object, there's no understanding of who he is and what he is. So it is a missing, it's like a vacuum. Now the problem with the vacuum is that the mind is very active, and with this interaction and where you are busy developing an understanding and the psyche, you draw from other parts and segments of, because you have to fill in this missing picture. The second last one, or the third last one, is the distorted one. Is the one that you don't understand what it is. You cannot say this is a father, this is a man, because it's a completely distortion of what it should be or what people think it should be. Then it becomes very complicated because it becomes ambivalence. And ambivalence has to do with this one, because you are 5 years old and you watch what is happening. The one day he gives you sweets, the other day he's eating your mother. The next day he's swearing at your sister, your grandmother is complaining about him. So it's ambivalence. And then the last one is the predator. Your schemata is of this violent predator in the house. Now, if we look at gender-based violence, if we look at Cape Town has the 5th highest murder rate in the world. And Dr. Samuels, working in the Correctional Service, will tell you how deep the level of violence and criminality that we are getting, which means that these youngsters, based on their schemata, has a completely distorted, ambivalent, destructive picture and object. Now, this schemata, this object, this predator schemata will lead to abandonment, instability, mistrust, abuse, emotional deprivation, defectiveness, and shame. They don't want to associate with this figure. They reject with this figure. And that's why we talk about cognitive dissonance. Now, cognitive dissonance is a very interesting one. I spoke to a few youngsters. They were in a youth center, and I asked them about the Our Father, and they couldn't pronounce the word Our Father who art in heaven, because they have a completely, what is a father? Who is this father in heaven? Because my earthly father is looking like this. I mean, how can we say Our Father in heaven if it is a missing concept, if it is distorted, if it is ambivalent, if it is a predator? And I was thinking about a good friend of mine. He's well known in media, and he said, I don't know why they're celebrating Father's Day. What is a father? My father left us when we were 3 and 4 years. He didn't leave my mother. They left us. So his interpretation 3-4 years is about this distant guy, this missing guy, this guy that turned his back on us. And that's why it's important that we have to make use of what I call cognitive restructuring. Now, Dr. Samuels will know the word recidivism. Recidivism is that after a certain time when they serve a sentence in prison and they go out, and then after 6 to 9 months or 9 to 12 months, I don't know what is the exact figure, they will be back in prison. And the reason why that is happening is because they empower them with skills, they're more assertive, they know who they are, but their criminal mindset has not changed. So what happened, I use the word, they become a skilled criminal. And the problem with that is that we have to do a lot of cognitive restructuring work. That's why I love the work of Dr. Samuels on the radio, because I thought, I think this guy is an expert in cognitive restructuring. Because I listened to the messages, the word that he's using, his inspiration, his radio, because you cannot only provide people with skills and programs and make them employed if you don't work with the cognition and the thoughts. And that's why the Bible says in Romans 12 verse 2, it's by the renewing of the mind that we will know how to find the perfect will of God. Now, how do we rechange? How do we do cognitive restructuring? I think the first thing is that we have to work at the house, the family. That is the basis of democracy. That's the basis of our character. We have started a program, Discipline Starts at Home, to look at how to empower parents, because parents have developed skewed understanding of parenting and of manhood and that's why I think we have to do a lot of work with families, and we have to do a lot of work restoring what's happening in the house. The second one is we have to spread the net wider for those kids. They need to be part of a community of faith. Because the theory is very clear, you need to have 3 systems in your life. You need to have not a parent, a significant other. You need to have a family member, and you need to have a teacher. So you need to have at least 2 of those 3 systems in your life. So I think that if we want to restructure the schemata, because it is possible to restructure the schemata, it is possible to give them a new framework and understanding of what is happening. And that's why I think that we have to do a lot of work in the Sunday schools. And we have to look at the curriculums of the Sunday schools, because they need to feel that they belong, they need to understand. And that's why I'm doing the work that I'm currently doing, because my father was the superintendent of the Sunday school. And he was like a school principal. And we did role playing about the Good Samaritan every second week. It was the Good Samaritan. It was just the Good Samaritan. And all of us just wanted to be part of the thieves. We just want to kill the guy in the role play, etc., etc., etc. We had such a lot of discussions. And I was 4 years old in the Sunday school regarding compassion. They taught us in the Sunday school compassion. The third thing that I think that is important is that we need to raise up role models that can mentor these guys, because that is exactly what object relations theory is telling us. It is through a positive role model and the interaction with the role model that, first of all, the schemata is changed. They're getting a new understanding, a new object, a new framework of what manhood is supposed to be. And then they will start to internalize it. And then the last one is, because we have moved from a modern society into a postmodern world. That is our biggest challenge. Our biggest challenge is we still have a modernist thinking, and we don't understand that we have moved into a postmodern world. Now, in the postmodern world, a lot of things are happening. It is happening at a faster pace. People are flooded with information like never before. more information. The internet is there, Google. There are more information and access to information now than ever before for the past 2,000 years. Now, what we need to do is these young people, they feel lonely. So we have to build new structures. We have to build quality relational systems that they can work with their abandonment, because abandonment is they feel they are marginalized, they are pushed to the periphery of society, and the most dangerous thing that can happen to someone and a young person is abandonment and loneliness. And that's why I think that we need to have more of these workshops, more of these webinars, more of the seminars, and we need to not only target young people who have a skewed or irrational understanding, but we also have to raise up momentous, the people in the sports sector, the people in the entertainment business, to mentor these guys, because it's only through mentoring over a certain time that they will develop a more positive and a more healthier understanding, first of all, of their existence, of who they are as a man and as a person. And I believe that we have to determine and be more vocal and aggressive, because our biggest fight is the toxic environment, the postmodern world, and the media that are portraying a certain view of manhood. So from my side, thank you very much. It was indeed a pleasure to share with you these few ideas.
Thank you, Quentin. Wow, this was very deep. And I think what I like is how you actually logged onto what Lester said, and how we see the relation of culture even in the mindset of becoming a man. Thank you for introducing your study to us, your study of violence, and also how you could log onto your study with what is the guy's name? James Gabrino. And also, yeah, Gabrino. And also how we can understand now, why do boys become murderers? What is this whole thing of violence on the mindset of youngsters? Thank you for putting emphasis on the fact that the Bible Society can still play a role in the grooming of children, where we start at Sunday school. And I must tell you that with last year of COVID, and the churches were closed, and during this year, many pastors asked us, can you help us in restarting our Sunday schools? Because the Sunday schools have fallen flat. So I think, thank you for that as well, that you can sensitize pastors again, the importance of our foundation of the word that can groom children. Thank you for telling us as parents the effects of media and how sometimes we think that, and sometimes how the media is actually crippling the value system of the family, and we sometimes don't know what our children are watching on social media, and we think they keep themselves busy, but how they become involved with these things with social ills and stuff like that. Thank you for telling us about this of schemata. Is that the right pronunciation? And yeah, and the 7 steps that you have told us about, and that we can even go and read up about that. How can we as a community now help to develop our children? And I think Lester will agree with me, and also the rest of the panelists, when from the African perspective, the village raises a child. And it is so beautiful how the community plays an integral role, that is what you said, in the development of a child. I would love our panelists to remember that, please give us your information as well, that we can continue to have these conversations as well, and where we can build on upcoming conversations as well, and conferences. And I think our next conference should be a conference where we can see one another face to face and proclaim all these things. Once again, thank you, Quinton. To the viewers, please put your comments and your questions to Quinton on the chat, and we will direct it to him after our last conversation of our last panelist. Thank you, Quinton. Thank you so much.
Thank you, pleasure.
Our next panelist is Pastor Dr. Jerome Samuels. Jerome is the Deputy Director at the Department of Correctional Services, and he's also Area Coordinator of Development and Care. Jerome is also known, as Quinton has alluded to, his radio program where he has conversations with offenders, their families and friends. Jerome is doing counseling and care among offenders in the correctional department. And this morning to Jerome, how do juveniles or male offenders understand manhood? What is the correctional strategies to rehabilitate male offenders of gender-based violence? And thank you to Quinton. Quinton gave us actually a new, I think it's 3, concepts or ways of, it's interpersonal violence and what is this? Intimate interpersonal violence.
Yeah.
Okay, over to you, Jerome.
Firstly, Dr. Ruth, thank you so much for the invitation extended by the Bible Society on this topic of gender-based violence. I think I want to start out by alluding to the previous speakers, where Lester spoke about women that becomes victims. And during my presentation, I will also allude to the fact of the importance of having victor-offender mediation, victor-offender dialogue, and that injury that was caused by the perpetrator. How do we deal with that in our society? Something that Quinton spoke about, profound for me, is the preventative work that needs to be done. And I do think by the time the person ends up with the Department of Correctional Services, we are doing reactive work, intervention that we're doing, and it should be where the values are instilled within Sunday schools, within the youth, within the households, and it's so important. I think another thing for me that was important is the developing of the schemata that Quinton spoke about, and how this also linked to recidivism. Now, when it comes to recidivism, recidivism is a topic which is repeat offending that I always focus on. I've done some research in the community of Atlantis on recidivism, and the topic was about challenges that offenders face upon release that leads to recidivism. And I wanted to understand, but how do people reason, and why do they keep on coming back to prison? So during the presentation, some of the things will come out as to what are the causes of recidivism. How does juvenile and male offenders understand manhood? Now, when it comes to understanding manhood, I've asked our social workers to engage, social worker psychologists, to engage with youth, and just to have an understanding, how do they see manhood? And the juveniles see manhood as role modeling their fathers. Now, when it comes to role modeling their fathers, it can be positive or it can be negative. And often you find when it comes to juvenile offenders, they role model the father that might also be incarcerated. And it's that negative image that they portray, the father portray, that this youngster also aspire to be, and that is seen as being part of manhood. They follow men in their immediate community. So where they see violence being perpetuated, they follow after that as well. I was curious to find out how do juveniles see the coming of manhood. Obviously, there's different perspective, but at the age of 21, it is seen as being matured. Manhood is also taking care of your children. So the juveniles see the perspective of manhood is taking care of their children. manhood is also described as a freedom. And interesting, manhood is seen as power, it's strength, physical strength. And to them, it is, if a person is strong, that is part of his manhood. And they've got this view, how much you can influence you have over others. So they are influenced, obviously, by the peers and by other people. And to them, the perspective of manhood is how much influence you have over people. So they've got this, like, I think about what Quinton said is so important, the cognitive restructuring that needs to take place within the juvenile, within the perpetrator, and how do we realign him to have an understanding of what is the right way of seeing things. They also, how much control you have. They see control over people as being part of manhood. When we engage with male offenders understand manhood as a way of impressing the fellow offenders. They find themselves in a correctional environment, and often, now I've been working for 27 years in the Department of Correctional Services, and often when you engage with individuals on a one-on-one basis, you will find that they project a certain image, but it's not the real person. But in order for the manhood in a male environment, it is they want to impress other offenders, and that's why they project a certain image. And often men who are in the correctional center equates manhood to physical strength, and also even the use of substances. And there's this constant competition. If I can use as much substances or drugs, mandrakes, that makes me more mature than the other person. Manhood is an important process in character development. Then male offenders also see manhood as taking responsibility for your life and your choices that you make. To be a man is to provide for one's family and take care of your children. Likewise, like Lester indicated, culturally, juveniles who aren't circumcised should first be circumcised before entering into manhood. So they see the perspective, especially the initiation of manhood start when the person goes to the bush and is being circumcised. Culturally, that is seen as part of being manhood. Being a man is being a law-abiding citizen. Now, when it comes to manhood, it goes along with role modeling. Youth often have negative role models. The gang leaders, the other gang members are seen as role models. One of the things that I found in my study is name brands. I've conducted the research in Atlantis community, and a person wouldn't think that name brands like your Adidas, Billabong, and those things, they would want to wear those things to be seen in the community. The research that I've conducted also found there's multi-causation factors that leads to recidivism, which is repeat offending, which is socioeconomic environment that the offender comes from, unemployment, peer pressure. But my study also found the absent father affects the youth's behavior. And often you find when the father is not present, the father is absent, that child acts out in a certain way within the community and within the household. And they see the violence, and then they perpetuate the same violence. Is often perpetuated because of how the young child was exposed to violence in the house or in the community. The child as a young adult starts acting out what they have seen in the household. Now, when it comes to this, I often say I grew up in a Nova Park at the time of a gangsterism environment. But I grew up with a dad that was also, he drank a lot. And at times he used to be very abusive towards my mom. And one of the things that I had to fight with inside of me was overcoming, not to become the same person. Because I recall Friday evenings that he used to come home, used to beat my mom, put us out of the house. And I had to fight that fight within myself when I got married, not to do the same thing that I was exposed to as a youngster. Now, when we look at the correctional environment, what are the correctional strategies for dealing with male offenders was serving as centers for gender-based violence. And obviously, there's various statistics when it comes to gender-based violence. And we know that it is prominent within South Africa. So there's various programs that we have in correctional services. We have a new beginning orientation program. When an offender arrives at the correctional center, we will take him through a program just alluding to what is it that he can expect within our correctional environment. We've got anger management program that address specifically aggression. How do they deal with violence? We have a crossroad correctional program where you come to a crossroad and you need to decide what is it that you're going to do within your life, and how do you do that cognitive restructuring and program yourself to do the right choices in life. We also have sexual orientation program, and within the SOP, often we deal with the element of violence as well, because when it comes to raping our victims, it often goes along with violence. Then there's behavior modification programs where inmates are involved, go through a process explaining the gangsterism and the influence of gangs on the outside, influence of gangs on the inside. We also have substance abuse programs, restorative justice programs, and pre-release programs. Now, dealing with gender-based violence, the social workers focus on anger management, and the objective is to empower offenders to deal with their aggressive behavior. There's aggressive behavior, and we address it through individual counseling. We address it through group therapy, which is therapeutic intervention that we do. The substance abuse correctional program, the objective, the main purpose is to help participants get insight into the negative effects of substance abuse. Often the perpetrator, you will find he acts aggressive with the usage of substances, and you see it often results in gender-based violence. Now, often offenders with gender-based violence go through a restorative justice program. And this is what Lester spoke about earlier also, where women often becomes the victim. And through the victim-offender dialogue or victim-offender mediation, we afford the victim an opportunity to sit across the offender. And the victim are given an opportunity to ask the offender, but why have you committed this crime against me as a person? And how are you going to take responsibility? Yes, a crime is, you've committed a crime against the law, but you also committed an injury against the individual. And then the individual will ask the question, but how are you going to take responsibility for the harm or the injury that you've caused to me? You often find in gender-based violence, in cases of murder, in cases of rape, where there's that goes along with aggression, people will ask the question, why have you singled me out? There's many other people. And that difficult questions are being asked to the perpetrator because in court, they would ask him relating to the case. But he's not addressing the victim directly in terms of where the victim want to know, but why me? And through this victim offender mediation, we try and address those things when it comes to gender-based violence. The life skills program, educating the offender about the role as men and as a parent, the impact of their behavior to the children. So we deal also with the absent father. Research conducted on what the challenges of offenders face that leads to recidivism indicate there's different factors like I've indicated before. And there's no positive role models. The social workers also has a Sosonke marriage and family program. The objectives is to deal with marriage and family. And they also, like Quinton said earlier, they deal with the values and the importance of instilling those positive values, conflict. How do you deal with conflict? Assertiveness. We also speak on domestic violence. And when we look at the psychological programs, our psychologist deals with any experience of violence or disrespect towards females in the body, in the boy's childhood, especially at home. So they try and address that. They also deal with how the male learned to cope with stress, who modeled the responses to stress for for the boy. So we paint that picture also. What is the boy's or the man's peer circle culture, accepted norms, the language with regards to the perception and treatment of women? So we focus a lot on how the individual deal with women. How do we influence the father, the male figures, to engage with the partners when conflict or tension? So we try and address those issues in terms of, yes, you find yourself in a marriage, but there's conflict in the marriage. How do you deal with it? Does it become physical? Do you deal with it in such a way that it can be communicative, where you can communicate, but it doesn't necessarily need to go over into violence? How has a boy learned to manage or express his emotions? And this is also comes back to what Quentin Adams brought, instilling it into the Sunday school, instilling it into the youth. How do they express their emotions? Developing empathy for the vulnerable boy, male child is key. We also, in psychological, we deal with the pain, the anger as a result of a mother or partner's behavior decision in terms of death. How do they cope with death, the absence, alcoholism, neglect, feeling rejected or not good enough? And often these attributes also contribute to the negative behavior where people start acting out. We also try and address the self-worth, the misconceptions of power, because like I said earlier, power is seen as physical strength and the power that you have controlling others. Anxiety can also play a role in violence as a poor method of coping. And also we try and address the unconscious underlying emotions. Now, gaining insight into the behavior by looking back at the present behavioral patterns of the individual will assist the male in understanding his behavior. So we go into the past and dig up a little bit and see what it is. In conclusion, we can deduce from the above programs that DCS have numerous programs dealing with gender-based violence. However, the sustainability of these programs beyond the gates of the correctional center becomes a challenge. You know, we have all these programs. We've got correctional programs, we've got educational programs, we've got psychological programs, we've got social work programs. But the real challenge is, how do we sustain it? My research has shown that the need of the offender whilst incarcerated and the need on the outside differs. So when the offender comes into our correctional environment, we go through a process where we do the offender rehabilitation path, we do an assessment with the offender, and they work out a sort of a plan of programs that he needs to go through. Inside, it's about completing whatever program he or she needs to do in order to comply with the parole board, in order to get parole. And often you will find that the person will go through that process, but like Quinton alluded, the cognitive restructuring didn't take place. And on the outside, the need is very different. It's about survival, putting bread on the table. And you'll find there's a different need when the person is on the inside. So in conclusion, the gender-based violence can only be curbed if it's addressed through social responsibility and a holistic approach by all stakeholders. And when I say all stakeholders, I mean communities must also accept accountability. Faith-based organizations, and non-governmental organizations, community-based organizations, and government departments. We all need to play a role in seeing about, bringing about, to ensure that no gender-based violence take place. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jerome, for your presentation, and also how you could make known to us concerning the absence of fathers, the role that fathers play in the life of offenders, and also whom an offender will see as a role model. Thank you also for telling us about the programs of the correctional services, and also the fact that you are constantly busy correcting the character or developing the character of offenders. And also the fact that the community should still be involved, whether the person is inside prison or outside prison. The community as a family plays an important role still in the process of correction. Thank you for telling us how much control does an offender feel that he has inside prison as well. And that you people as members of the correctional services, the amount of work that you put in to see that there is a correction taking place, a correction in mannerism, a correction of the mind, and the role that you guys are playing, so that when that offender comes out of prison or are released from prison, that you at least know that this person went through the correct programs. So thank you, Jerome. Thank you also for telling us your story as how you grew up and the impact that it has had on your life. Thank you so much. Our last speaker is Dr. Braam Hanekom. Dr. Braam Hanekom is a dominee. He's also the director of the Center of Public Witness, and he is the secretary of the Western Cape Ecumenical Network. And Dr. Braam Hanekom will speak to us from a perspective, an Afrikaner perspective. Audience, remember that we speak from different cultures and backgrounds, but we are fighting a common scourge, and that is gender-based violence. So Dr. Braam Hanekom will tell us the understanding of manhood in a changed South Africa, and how can the Bible be used to change the mindset and behavior of male adolescents or male youngsters. So Dr. Braam Hanekom, over to you. So I also like to notify the viewers that Dr. Hanekom will leave us a little bit earlier from this conversation. So I think when we are done, or when he completes his conversation, that we maybe will direct first his comments and questions so that he could be released earlier than the other panelists. Is that fine with all of us? Okay, thank you. Over to you, Braam.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you for the invite, and thank you for the previous presentations. It was wonderful listening to you. I will try not to repeat, but if anything, I would like to confirm some of the stuff that you've said. Wonderful inputs. For the sake of time, I'm going to jump right into the conversation with the topic that was given to me. What is the understanding of manhood in a changed South Africa? And can the Bible be used to change the mindset of behavior of male adolescents? Now, before we go into that, maybe I must just ask the question is, why do we want to change the mindset? Some of you have alluded to that, but let me just confirm, mindsets and frameworks are real. Mindsets can enslave people. Mindsets can destroy people. And I think it was Quinton, you alluded to Romans, and may I just read it to you, Romans 12 verse 2, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The first time that I stumbled across this issue many years ago was through a book by Douglas Walroth called Frameworks. And I think he was one of the first guys who really told us what happened in your 20s, the kind of framework, the dominant mindset that you live with in your 20s or even earlier will perpetuate throughout your life. He then, I think, referred to the strivers, the hardworking, dedicated people who want to eventually retire, the boomers, the Woodstock generation, and I think afterwards we've learned about Generation Z and Generation Y. So just to say, all of us in some way or the other are being enslaved through a particular mindset. It's not only the grouping that we are talking about today, and that causes gender-based violence. It is a reality, and we need to deal with that. Now, if we can come to the question, why? Now, what is so dangerous about a male-dominant society and patriarchy? And let me just, maybe as some kind of summary, because some of you have said it already, may I just list the following? Entitlement. It gives you entitlement to the use and abuse of others. You think it's your right. You really believe it's okay to do it. We all know that this disproportional power blinds people, and blind to the reality, to the hurt, to what's happening. Disproportional power often leads to violence, and it's this power thing. Patriarchy and the dominant male society, we know about the injustices in the workplace. When it comes to payment and everything that goes. Male dominant society leads to an insensitive society. I think it leads to a false concept of leadership, and I want to come back to that. Vice versa, servant leadership. And obviously, and we've stated it over and over again this morning, a skewed idea of fatherhood. Now, if I may just, and I was asked to do that, just say something about male dominance in the Afrikaner culture. And some of these, and I've just jotted down, Ruth, some basic characteristics, but I think people will recognize some of it. It's what we call a rough, tough, strong, cowboys don't cry, hunters, farmers. It's a tough life out there. You need to hunt and know how to use a rifle. I can add to that. I will come just back now to the pictures, the role of the military in my generation, and I think some work needs to be done on the impact of the military on the lives. Also, leaving white males with a lot of trauma and unresolved trauma. You've got to be willful. But just that one thing that I've said, the pictures tell their own stories. You must see how many family portraits you will get where the father is sitting down and then the wife is standing behind him, maybe with a hand on his shoulder. And then obviously that flows from that. Oh yes, then the question: are you paternalistic? Are you really meaning to do good? You are the leader because that's the best way, or are you a gentleman? What's the difference? I think we haven't got time to go into that one, but the difference between being a real gentleman or just being paternalistic. Then from all of this flow the terrible thing of not being in touch with your own emotions, not understanding what is happening with yourself. And then now this is trauma is something that we find in every culture in South Africa at the moment for different reasons. But in one of my dialogues, someone said about the gang violence on the Cape Flats. I think she said, men do cry, but they cry bullets. They cry with their fists. And it's some kind of a emotional reaction to all of this. So it becomes part of the culture, it becomes part of the mindset. And on the surface, it looks okay. But if you really look at the results, then it's not good. So if I just then may come to the Bible, and that was the question. I think we find, and you will agree, a very dominant male culture, patriarchy in the Old Testament, and you've got to understand it in the Middle East culture. It's not only amongst the Jewish culture. You will find it in Islam still today. And so this whole Middle East culture, as is reflected in the Old Testament. But then comes along the New Testament and Jesus Christ. And may I just show some of it here, just a couple of snapshot remarks. The first one in Ephesians 6, verse 4, fathers, do not provoke your children. So what Paul is saying here, fathers, there's a style of fatherhood that is really not good. And it's one small sentence, but it's a whole style of leadership that's behind it. Then the second one, and I'm going to rush through it quickly, Ruth, is I think you alluded to it, Quinton, God is the father. What kind of father, or Jerome, what kind of father do we see? But you find the metaphor of God the Father, but then you see Jesus Christ as friend and role model. As friend and role model. And then when Jesus comes along and speak about in particular about leadership in Luke 22, then he says, if you look at the world, you will find all kinds of leaders, but that's not the kind of leadership that I want. And then if I can extract from the whole of the New Testament, for the sake of time, a style of leadership, then you'll agree with me, words like humility, servanthood, and sensitivity becomes very important. Sensitivity, servanthood, and humility. If I can just remind you of a wonderful little poem of the black poet Langston Hughes that I stumbled across many years ago. He said the following, and he was referring to what happened to black people in America. And he said, although my mouth is wide with laughter, you do not hear my inner cry. Although my feet are gay with dancing, you do not see I die. And I think it referred to, on the surface, people can smile, people can laugh, they can act pleasantly, but there's this deep inside, there's this inner turmoil. And now we come to the complex legacy that our history left us. You know what happened to black people, but I also want to say, people must understand that white people are also victims of apartheid and colonialism. And people must understand that. It also left the psyche, the mindset of white people in a mess. So, although my mouth is wide with laughter, you do not hear my inner cry. Although my feet are gay with dancing, you do not see I die. One of the most special poems that I've ever stumbled across. And then I just want to end off, Ruth, by saying, if we then ask the question, are we talking about a changing reality? I really want to say it's work in progress. If I just may say one sentence on the negative, I think we've worked in many cases from dominance to absence. It was a dominant culture, and then we saw in many families that the fathers left. Or, they left the family, or they are so busy with their work. But then on the positive, I want to say, we're talking about work in progress. I see a trend in the community that I live, the Afrikaner community, a trend from leading households to serving households. From leading households to serving households. I see a trend from leading the kerkraad and the church council to leading the family. And if I use the word leadership, then I want to use it within the context that I've referred to, a New Testament context and a new concept of leadership. I hope, I dream that we are moving from absence to presence. I hope, I pray that we move from church goers to spiritual mentors. I can spend the whole morning on this. What's the difference between a church goer and a spiritual mentor for your family? I hope and pray that we move from a reality where men punish to a reality where men who are really involved. And then finally, from a generation who tell and demand respect to a generation who are really role models. I think one of you touched on that as well. So to sum it up, Ruth, what I see is a changing reality, because if we go back to the Bible, in essence, the Bible is the example of a changing reality. From an Old Testament culture to a New Testament culture where Jesus came along and taught us about kenosis and emptying yourself and serving and giving your life for your family and your children. So that is for me the biggest change, and I hope it makes sense to you. We are all struggling within our own culture, and may I just close off, if we're running out of time, may I just, there's one blessing, the Afrikaner community received a lot of blessings within the new dispensation. We must acknowledge that. And one of the blessings was that we lost all power. And it's a good thing. Because with that, it changed the mindset of many white males. They in reality lost power. And with that, what I see in my ministry, a changing reality of more sensitivity and male people, fathers coming back to their families, walking with their families in the street, caring for them, because they now see a new reality. I thank you so much.
Wow, that was insightful. Thank you, Braam. And thank you for how you could bring this conversation together by using the word of God. And we thank you for reminding us about the change of mindset and the frameworks that we have concerning certain things and how the mind can change. We thank you for telling us that gender-based violence is a reality, as you allude to what the previous speakers have said about gender-based violence. And for me, that you pick on a very important factor, and that is the factor about the patriarchal system, and how that you can use the word of God still to say, but in Jesus Christ, there is a changed reality from an Old Testament perspective into the New Testament perspective. And what is so beautiful is how all four of yours, your presentations, how it actually blends into one another or relates to one another, and bringing us back the biblical account of what it really means to be a man and how men can change also due to the Bible. Thank you, Braam. Thank you to all the panelists for your time as well. And I'm just going to go, Braam, if you can give us maybe just 2 minutes of your time. We just want to go back to our audience. And I think we will start with Braam and just check what did the viewers put on the chat there. I see there's not yet a comment for you on the chat.
Maybe the second one.
The second one.
Second one.
I can't see them. Just open for me the chat. That's it. Thank you. That one. Okay. That was not for Braam. Okay, we will say. Nontando Adebe. Dr. Nontando Adebe, she was the leader of the South African Circle of Women. She writes a lot of comments to our panelists this morning, and we say thank you to you, Dr. Adebe. And thanks to Dr. Ruth and Lester. How can African culture contribute to gender roles that counter gender-based violence? And how can men challenge other men who believe in inferiority of women? So I think, Lester, we give that to you. Braam must just give us an indication before you leave so that I can thank him. Lester, you've got that one?
Yes, I got it. Thank you so much to Dr. Madubela for that question. How can African culture contribute to gender roles that counter gender-based violence? Look, I think one of the things that we, need to go back to is the fundamentals of who we are, and partly, I love what Braam has shared. One of the things that I've written down is from absence to presence. But I think that as much as we are seeing that, more publicly and more of what is publicized, and we were commenting on this the other day, is the negative side of families where fathers are absent. And no one talks about the positive side where we see that actually, whilst you have more on the news, the absent fathers and all of these things, but you also have a group of young and upcoming families who are staying together. These families are going to church, as Braam has shared there. And they are not only just churchgoers. Of course, the one heartbreaking element of it is that we can't take away is that from last year up until now with COVID-19, we have seen such a high rise of divorce in communities as well. Marriages have been taken apart as a result of the fact that people were working. So it just kind of broke the norm that existed in some families, where the father would come in at 6 and then all he does is eat and then go to bed. So COVID-19 has broken some of that by actually creating an environment where people now stay together more than they actually used to, which is supposed to be a blessing in a way, but in some families, unfortunately, it got into the negative side of it. So one of the things that I think is changing in terms of the African culture and our Black people is that family is becoming more important. And when I say family, I mean that the idea of staying together is a family. We see more than I've never seen some of the stuff, even that we do ourselves, where we go watch games, go pick up our kids. I was never picked up as a kid, at school or dropped at school. Those are things that we kind of fumbled in our own way. So I think the gradual education and getting into more of these engagements and talks of making sure that, what we do on Wednesdays, Empowered Men, and we have these conversations. Those conversations, I believe that they are building some of these things that have actually been taken away and creating a new culture amongst men that you are actually supposed to hold your hand, your wife's hand in the mall. In the manner in which I grew up, that never happened. I would never have done that, but I decided to make some of the changes. So I think that's what we need to do. Actually, we need to elevate women in how we deal with them as men, and therefore influence the group of young men that are coming up by having more of these exemplary behaviors, if you like, other than just talk about it. But we need to make sure that we are exemplary in how we, and deliberate as well. Because there's one thing that we need deliberately and be conscious of making that change. I think that's the one thing. In order for us to achieve what, Quinton was talking about, the schemata is we need to be deliberate all the time, so that someone else is looking at that and that is being etched in their mind, and they're beginning to see that this is the way to go. So I think that's one of the things that we can do.
Thank you. Thank you, Lester. Braam, before you leave, there's your question. Thank you, Braam, for hope in changing reality and deep engagement with history and current context from a white perspective. Can you say something about headship This is what Nontando was asking you.
Yeah, Montando, thank you for the question, but you're putting me on the spot. It's a difficult one and a very heated, debated concept in our times. I want to go back to what I've said about leadership, because you will agree with me, the head of the family, Ephesians 5, are the man now, the head of the family. You can exchange the word head, I think, with leadership, but what kind of leadership are we talking about? In any organization, you need some kind of leadership. Whether it's a church or a soccer team or a rugby team or any organization, doesn't matter where, if you've got 3 or 4 people together, you need some kind of leadership, just for good organizational purposes. But I think the thing has changed now, where people say and argue, what kind of leadership or headship do we need? If a good leader will say, well, what is the essence of a leader? You get a vision, you get a team, and then it's your duty to ensure that all the gifts within the team are optimized. So if you are, say, the head of the family, and you see that your wife has many more gifts in finances or whatever than you are, then it's your obligation as the leader to ensure that she's empowered and respected to fulfill the role within the family for the benefit of the family according to the gifts that God has given her. So yes, I mean, you can have a very narrow view of headship, and then you can get a broader view of headship within the broader framework of leadership, within the broader framework of leadership as how it has evolved within our current context, that can really serve the cause much, much better. But let me just say the final word then, but it all boils down to the small little word respect. Mm-hmm. That is the counter, that is the balance. If a man and wife should respect one another and honor them as a gift from God in a sensitive way, then you can deal with all these issues. But the problem is people have a narrow view of headship, and then they take that as the end and all, and it turn into abusive power and all the other evil things that we see. So that's the short answer at this point.
Thank you, Braam. That was very, very clear. We understand your reasoning behind headship as well. On behalf of the Bible Society, we also want to thank you this morning, this afternoon, for your contribution towards this conversation. And we know that this conversation can circle out, as Quinton and Jerome has alluded to, that we need more of these conversations. And we trust that in future that you will again be part of the panelists here, as you made yourself very clear this afternoon of what you understand about manhood and how you could bring the biblical context for us out so clearly. Thank you so much, Braam. God bless you. Thank you. Our next question will be to Jerome, am I right? No, to Quinton. Quinton, this is from Nontando Hadebe. Thank you for your informative presentation. How do we ensure that the content of Sunday school promotes dignity and equality of women and men through stories and teachings that support this?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to keep it very short. I think it's important that we have to identify stories in the Bible with the themes surrounding dignity and equality. And then the second thing is we have to rewrite it in a child-friendly manner or method. And then thirdly, we must also try not only to use storytelling as a method, but we must try to use role play or psychodrama that that's a term that we use, because storytelling is one way of learning, but the moment they are doing role playing and psychodrama or drama, and they dramatize the story, that is the best way of internalizing the themes. So it's important that we need to use we need to first identify the stories that reflects dignity and equality, and we have to write it in a child-friendly manner. And thirdly, we have to do psychodrama, role play, and then we need to have creative ways of working through these themes so that they can internalize. And then lastly, I think we have to make it fun so that they can have a positive experience regarding the stories. It mustn't feel like they are at school or they're sitting there in the naughty corner and someone trying to push the themes in their throat or down their throat. But I think what is important is that we need to create a fun environment of learning and where they can be actively involved through drama and psychodrama or role play.
Thank you, Quinton. That was very clear. And thank you for actually helping us to move from storytelling to role playing or psychodrama. And I think that will be something new to us when we start writing children's stories or children's literature, that we should concentrate on this now. Thank you so much. Braam is leaving us because he's heading for Cape Town. He's in Wellington and he is now on his way to Cape Town, and may he have a journey that has got God's grace and peace on the road. Thank you, Braam. Our next question is to Jerome. Can you just go down for me, please? That's it. Jerome, this is also from Dr. Nontando. Thanks, Jerome, for sharing the programs and your research that she means in the correctional services. Can you share success stories? If resources were not a challenge, what would you add or do differently? So the question is, can you please share a success story? And if resources were not a challenge, what would you add or do differently?
Thank you so much for the question, Doctor. I think we've got numerous success stories. One of I've shared with the panel just before we started. We're currently busy with barista training, and in Woodstock and in Durbanville, there's a restaurant called it's a coffee shop called Gang Star, from gangster to a star, and it's called Gang Star. And they actually make breakfast. But what's interesting about the concept, it's all ex-offenders that's working there, and they are running the coffee shop. They're currently running it. And about 2 months ago, we started this process where I've engaged with the organization called Message Trust, and they came into Gurut Correctional Center, and they're currently busy training offenders to become baristas. And upon completion of the barista training, they will go to do job shadowing at the restaurant, and then they'll also place them at certain coffee shops in order to supply employment. We also starting with the chef assistant course, where we train offenders how to work in the kitchen. And we had previously done this course also, and some of the offenders went on to work in the restaurants where they find employment. I think for me, if there's something that I would have loved to see, it would be to establish cooperatives. Currently, we're giving out millions of rands the government spend when it comes to bread for offenders. Each offender per day get 8 slices of bread. And you're sitting with the offender population of about 155,000 offenders. And if you think about 8 slices per day per offender, I see Quentin is working it out. It amounts to a lot of money. But if you think about it, we give this out to a service provider, often on the outside, whereas we could have started a cooperative with ex-offenders that could supply the bread to correctional services. And that would have also created an employment opportunity for those offenders. You find in the States, they have all the number plates are made by prisons. They make the number plates, offenders make the number plates, and they are being remunerated through that. So we need to find ways and means, and it's also a difficult dichotomy, because between giving employment to an ex-offender, and we're sitting with a 34% unemployment rate in South Africa. So how do you give employment to the offender, and on the other side you have this huge population that's also unemployed? Thank you.
Wow, that is interesting. Thank you, Jerome. Very, very interesting. And I think we need to go and check out these coffee shops. The one is in Woodstock and the one is in Durbanville.
Correct.
Thank you. There's a question from Pastor Denise Francis. Is there a platform for a current NGO, NBO, etc. organizations that are working with men in our communities? I think that is directed to all three of you. Who will go first? Quentin.
Yeah, when this Anine Boysen case happened in 2012, I met a group, Boys to Men in Bredasdorp. And they have done extensive work with young boys. And I was in a workshop with them to see how they could scale the project. And it was very difficult because I think two of the leaders in the organization had started it, left Bredasdorp because of employment opportunities. But there are generally a lack of organizations focusing on men. You have the Fatherhood Foundation in Johannesburg. But what I like is the book of Julian Jansen. It's an Afrikaans book, Fatherlose Paas. I think what we have to do is, I think we have to write more about positive fatherhood and manhood. And I think if we can publish more books and make it available, because people don't want to join necessarily a organization, but there are a lot of young men groups in churches. We have young men in the Anglican tradition, in the Service Guild, in the youth, in the Sunday school, young men associations within the structures. But I think they lack good material. And I think the issues that we dealt with, what Lester shared with us, I think it's important, what Braam and what Dr. Jerome shared with us. I think if we can publish that in a booklet and make it a discussion, a guide with some examples and stories, and so that they can have literature that they can work with. I think the literature on this topic is very scarce. And I think if we can deepen and broaden that field of publishing stories, literature, share our own experiences with our fathers and what happened, so that they can have some material and as a basis from there where they can work with. And then very important, what is interesting about Julian Jansen's book is actually sad when you look at the back page of the book. There are only a few organizations, very, very little organizations that are focusing on the issues of men. So I think that is an area of concern, and I think we, at our next conference or whatever, a workshop or seminar, we can talk to Julian Jansen and ask him to lead the discussion, because he has published a very good book, very small and very insightful, Fatherlose Seuns sonder paas. Seuns sonder paas, yeah. But I think we need more broader, wider, different cultures, experiences, our own experiences. And if we can bring out the publication, then we can distribute it. And how do you have discussions about difficult issues? I had a discussion with a group of young men in Bredasdorp, and it was very interesting. It was actually shocking to hear their views and their perspectives about life and issues, and I think we have to fill that gap and see and monitor and track it and implement it and execute it and see how we can have an impact on that. Yeah.
Quentin, thank you so much, because now you're giving us homework as well. So you can see, Lester, you are now no longer a presenter and a radio, whatever. You will start writing the book now, because Quentin is sensitizing us now to get into the real stuff of putting it on the shelves. So you will become an author now.
Yeah, I think, I concur with everything that he says. And I think thanks to you, Dr. Ruth, and Bible Society of South Africa for this, because I think this is one of the things that is needed. Discussions that go across culture, we need to rub shoulders with each other, because the problems are becoming more and more South African in nature than a Black problem or an African problem or a colored problem. And I think the more we have platforms like this, because I'm thinking also, as Quinton was talking, that we have a juvenile, sort of facility that a friend of mine goes to every Wednesday. So there's a mix. You get as young as 12, year-olds, girls, boys, that have committed, atrocious crimes that you would never think of in that particular age, and so in this particular one here in Cambridge, there's been an increase now on the girls' side. As a result, there is a woman that he's asked to actually be part of that. Azizo Apleni, who also was, who's written a book, was raped by her father, and all of that. So you are becoming, you're beginning to see that this thing is no longer it's no longer enough for me to cry foul in my own space. We need all of us to cross-pollinate ideas and share experiences. And then when we are sharing these experiences within each other's spaces, then people, the young kids, as they grow up, they begin to open up, to what type of a South Africa it can be if we all work together, So I think, I would like to really thank you for inviting us here, and it's been great, gentlemen. It's been nice knowing you as well. I really hope that we will have more discussions on this subject. Books as well. We'll probably need, we write a lot of things, I'm sure, in our spaces. So maybe need to put that in, and become experiences that everyone can share.
Thank you, Lester. Jerome, you wanted to respond?
Yeah. There's an organization called Center for Care and Contact. They're also on Facebook. Candace Horners is a social worker. And they've been doing also where they focus on young men. I think about a month ago, they also had a webinar on the absent father. I formed part of that channel as well. But the people they can contact with her. They're working as a team. Center for Care and Contact. They're on Facebook, so they can most probably also be in touch with them. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that information. And I think whenever you guys also have other webinars, please notify Bible Society as well, so that we can look into these things and see what other information and literature we can come up with, so that our society can be fed by the word of God. The next comment was also from the others. What is that? Alban Bowler comments. Yeah. Alban Bowler says that challenge of patriarchy as main driver, 11th commandment for GBV, and disrespect in general needs to be addressed. Quinton's idea of story writing and plays is a powerful mode for young children. So yes, he alluded to that as well, Quinton. As I've said that, I thank you for the role playing and the psychodrama thing. Okay, and then Zahita asks, Christianity has done a lot in bringing positive changes, but also criticized for being another voice of the white perspective. How it can be more accepted in changing cultural driven practice such as GBV. To any of the three panelists, should I reread it? Or Christianity has done a lot in bringing positive changes, but also criticized for being another voice of the white perspective. How can it be more accepted in changing cultural driven practices such as gender-based violence?
Look, I think there's been a lot of that narrative that has, kind of been permeated a lot and pushed, the construct that Christianity is, comes from white people, and therefore it was brought about to actually, put us in line, and so on. But I think also, a lot more can be proven in terms of, one of the golden rules that Jesus talks about, and which is, do unto others as you would do unto you. I think for me, that's just a fundamental that comes across. It doesn't matter what culture or where you come from, whether you're Christian or not. And being translated in African culture as umuntu ngabantu, ubuntu as it were. So that concept is a concept that needs all of us together. It doesn't matter where we come from. So I don't think that necessarily, the idea and the criticism around Christianity will ever, fall away. That criticism will stay for a very long time. But also what we've seen is that criticism is mostly used by people who are trying to drive a different agenda. And mostly people will say, those people who would call themselves as non-colonialists, people who are pushing the agenda, that colonialism has been, the be-all and end-all of our troubles. So I think the people are beginning to see more and more that there is a separate agenda that is driven when that criticism comes to the fore, than when you look at the actual work that is being done. And a lot of criticism has actually been pushed with the current democracy that has driven away Christianity in schools, or, that whole prayer and all of those things that have happened, as Quinton has also, alluded to. So I think the fundamentals and all of those things, families need to drive that now, more than schools, but also organizations they need to drive those fundamentals.
Thank you, Lester, for your clear explanation concerning that. Do we have another question, another comment? Okay, I think that brings us to the end of all the questions and the comments. I don't know whether the panelists, before I say thank you to you, would like to say a last thing, just in one sentence.
Maybe just to say thank you, Dr. Ruth and the Bible Society, for the invitation extended. I think with regards to the last question that was asked, culturally driven practice such as gender-based violence, I think it's important to have dialogues, and it's through dialogues that we engage, listening to Lester from a cultural perspective, that a person have insight also into the understanding, because we tend to be confined within our own constructs. This is how we see it from a cultural perspective. And it's only through the dialogue that we see the other side of the coin as well. So I do think the more we dialogue, the more people have insight into phenomena such as gender-based violence and other pertinent topics that can be discussed within cultural diversity as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Ruth. And the panelists, Quentin, always good seeing you, Mania. Lester, nice meeting you.
Thank you, Jerome, Pastor Dr. Jerome Samuels. Thank you to you as well. Lester, Quinton,
Yes.
some
Yeah,
last
thank you very-
comments?
Thank you,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you very
And thanks to Leon for the technical work that he's done there. So we haven't had any technical problems. And thanks to Pastor Samuels and Quinton as well. And thanks to you, Dr. Ruth, for the invite, and Bible Society. Thank you so much.
Quinton, are you done?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to share this panel with the other people. Thanks, Lester. It was very insightful and interesting to listen to your views. Dr. Samuels, Dr. Ruth, Dr. Braam, in his absence. I feel inspired. I really feel inspired. And I really feel that despite the scourge of GBV in our country, we are busy to fight back and busy rewriting the history and a new narrative in our country. And I'm very, very inspired by what happened. And thanks to the Bible Society and to all the listeners and participants. I really thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Quinton. Just before I say a final words of thanks to you is that Quinton, you mentioned Julian. I did invite him, but due to his workload, he wasn't able to converse with us today, but he promised next year, and he asked me, please, that I should involve him next year when we have also these discussions, and we trust next year that despite still this COVID, that we will be able to meet in a hall or somewhere in a big hall or whatever we call it, and then that we can have these live discussions. And I hope, Lester, you will be able to fly down to Cape Town that time and talk to us more about all these things, that your conversations with men to men or boys to men and whatever. And also Quinton, who really plays a crucial role here in Cape Town, him and Dr. Jerome, concerning corrective behaviors. Because for him, it's not only about building shacks as a psychologist. It's a strange combination, a shack builder and a psychologist. But also that he brings into perspective the whole community and the mindset of the community, and that we thank God for. And also the fact that we can bring the Bible into these discussions as well, and how we can still use the Bible to assure corrective behavior, and that we trust God that the Bible will always be used so that we can listen to God and listen to one another and respect one another. So to all four of you, gentlemen, thank you so much. And thank you for taking out the time to talk to us and to move with us into a certain direction. And definitely next year we will meet each other again. Thank you to our audience, our viewers, for your participation here this afternoon. Especially to those also who wrote comments and asked questions. And we trust that as we are journeying with different perspectives and different conversations and different speakers, that we, at the end of the day, will be able to counteract the scourge of gender-based violence. And as we are all moving into the 16 days of activism, we trust that God will guide and protect us in the process of counteracting the scourge. And so that at the end of the day, that the killing and the brutal killings of women and children and this abuse will stop. So thank you to everybody. Thank you to Leon here on the behind the screens. He's sitting here next to me, and he has set up this whole thing. And we want to thank you, Leon, for your work behind the screens, and to everybody who played an integral role in this situation. Thank you so much. Goodbye to everybody. See you again. Thank you.